The fire took everything: her parents, her little brother, the farmhouse where 3 generations had lived and loved. 8-year-old Clara Mitchell was the only one who made it out, carried from the flames by her father's final act of courage before the roof collapsed. The authorities placed her with distant relatives in the city, people who saw her as an obligation rather than family. She lasted 3 weeks before disappearing into the night, returning to the only place that felt like home, the burned ruins on the mountain. But Clara didn't stay in the ashes. She walked deeper into the forest her father had taught her to respect and fear, and she didn't walk alone. A wolf with amber eyes followed her, keeping pace but never approaching. By winter's first snow, the forest had accepted her as one of its own. The girl who survived fire would learn to survive everything else the wilderness could throw at her. But could an 8-year-old truly raise herself in the wild? And what happens when the child of civilization becomes something entirely other, neither fully human nor completely wild, but something in between? The smell of smoke never truly left Clara's memory. Even months later, she would wake gasping, certain she could taste ash on her tongue, feel heat blistering her skin. But it was always just memory, the ghost of that April night when everything burned. Clara had been sleeping when her father burst into her room, his face streaked with soot, his eyes wide with the kind of fear she'd never seen in him before. Thomas Mitchell was a man who'd taught his daughter to handle snakes without flinching, who'd shown her how to read storm clouds and predict weather days in advance. He wasn't afraid of anything, until the night the farmhouse caught fire. "Clara, wake up." He'd lifted her from bed, carrying her toward the window. Through the door behind him, she could see orange light and hear the terrible roar of flames consuming their home. "Where's Mama? Where's Jamie? I'm getting them, but you need to go now." He opened her window, the one that looked out over the porch roof. "Climb out, slide to the edge, and drop. It's not far. Run to the creek and wait for us there. Daddy, now Clara." She'd climbed through, the cool April air shocking after the heat inside. From the roof, she could see flames licking through the kitchen window, could hear her mother screaming her little brother's name from somewhere inside. Clara slid to the edge, hung from the gutter, and dropped into her mother's garden, crushing spring flowers beneath her bare feet. She ran toward the creek, her nightgown flapping around her knees, and turned back just in time to see the roof collapse. The sound was like the world ending, a tremendous crash followed by an explosion of sparks that lit up the night sky. Clara screamed, running back toward the house, but the heat drove her away. She circled to the back, to the side, looking for any way in, any way to save her family, but there was no way. The entire structure was engulfed, and Clara could do nothing but watch as it consumed everyone she loved. Neighbors arrived, the Hendersons from the next farm over, alerted by the glow of flames visible for miles. They found Clara sitting in the dirt, staring at the inferno, her face blank with shock. "Oh, sweetheart," Mrs. Henderson sobbed, wrapping Clara in a blanket. "Oh, you poor baby." Clara didn't respond, couldn't. Her voice had fled with her family into the flames. The fire burned through the night. By dawn, there was nothing left but a blackened foundation and the stone chimney standing like a grave marker. The fire marshal investigated, finding evidence of an electrical fault in the old wiring. Tragedy, not arson, accidental. As if that made it better. They found 3 bodies in the ruins. Clara's father near what had been the stairs, apparently overcome by smoke while trying to reach the 2nd floor. Her mother and 6-year-old brother Jamie in what remained of his bedroom, where she'd tried to shelter him from the flames. The funerals were a blur. Distant relatives Clara barely knew descended on the mountain community, arguing in hushed voices about what to do with the girl. None of them wanted the responsibility of an 8-year-old orphan, but none wanted to be the one who refused either. In the end, Aunt Marjorie won or lost, depending on perspective. Marjorie was Thomas's second cousin, a woman in her 50s who lived in a sterile apartment in Portland. She had no children, no pets, no apparent capacity for warmth or spontaneity. "I'll take her," Marjorie announced after the funeral. "She can have the spare room. I'll enroll her in school for the fall." Clara, still not speaking, simply stared at this stranger who would now determine her fate. The drive to Portland took 4 hours. Clara pressed her face against the car window, watching the mountains fade into the distance, watching the trees thin and give way to buildings, concrete, the gray sprawl of the city. Marjorie's apartment was on the 14th floor of a building that smelled like cleaning solution and old carpet. The spare room had beige walls, a twin bed with a floral comforter, and a window that looked out at other buildings, not a tree in sight. "This is yours now," Marjorie said, setting Clara's small suitcase on the bed. Someone had packed it with clothes salvaged from a donation drive, nothing that had belonged to Clara before. Everything that had been hers was ash. "I have rules. No noise after 8 p.m., no touching my things, no tracking dirt into the apartment. Understand?" Clara nodded mutely. I don't know what your parents allowed, but this is my home, and you'll respect it. I've taken time off work this week to get you settled, but starting Monday, you'll need to entertain yourself during the day. There's a library 2 blocks away. You're old enough to walk there alone." More nods. Clara felt like a puppet, her body going through motions while her mind remained elsewhere. Back in the mountains, back in the forest, back when her family was alive. The first week was bearable. Clara spent hours at the library, losing herself in books about wilderness survival, about animals, about anything that wasn't the sterile reality of Marjorie's apartment. The librarian, a kind woman named Mrs. Chen, didn't press Clara to speak, just let her read in peace. But at night, back in the beige room with its window showing only concrete and glass, Clara felt like she was suffocating. The air was wrong, too still, too processed. She missed the sound of wind through pines, missed the way moonlight looked filtering through tree branches, missed the chorus of frogs from the creek. Most of all, she missed her family. Marjorie tried, in her limited way. She made sure Clara ate, made sure she bathed, made sure she had clean clothes, but she didn't know how to comfort a grieving child, how to reach someone drowning in silent trauma. "You need to move on," Marjorie said one evening, 2 weeks after Clara's arrival. "I know it's hard, but dwelling on the past won't help. Your parents would want you to adapt, to make the best of things." Clara stared at her, rage building behind her silence. How dare this woman tell her what her parents would want? How dare she suggest that 3 weeks was sufficient time to move on from watching your entire family burn to death? That night, Clara made her decision. She waited until Marjorie's bedroom light went out, until the apartment fell silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic. Then she dressed in her sturdiest clothes, packed a small backpack with food from the kitchen, and climbed out her window onto the fire escape. She was 14 floors up, but Clara had grown up climbing trees twice that height. The fire escape led to an alley. The alley led to a street. The street led to a bus station. Clara had stolen $60 from Marjorie's purse, enough for a ticket back to the mountains, back home. She felt a twinge of guilt about the theft but pushed it aside. Marjorie had taken her from everything she knew. $60 was small payment for that loss. The bus left at 3 a.m., arriving at the mountain town of Cedar Ridge by dawn. From there, Clara walked. She knew these roads, had traveled them countless times with her father. The Mitchell farm was 10 miles from town, up a winding mountain road that most people avoided in winter. It was late April now. Spring fully arrived, the forest bursting with new growth. Clara walked steadily, her small legs eating up miles with the endurance built from years of hiking with her father. By midday, she reached what remained of the farm. The blackened foundation sat like a wound in the cleared land, the stone chimney still standing sentinel. Yellow caution tape surrounded the site, fluttering in the breeze. Clara approached slowly, memories crashing over her. There, that blackened spot had been the kitchen where her mother taught her to make biscuits. That corner was where Jamie's toy box had stood, overflowing with wooden animals their father carved. That space marked her parents' bedroom, where she'd crawled into bed during thunderstorms. All gone, all ash. Clara stood in the center of the ruins, and finally, allowed herself to cry. Not the quiet, controlled tears she'd shed at the funeral, but wrenching sobs that tore from her chest and echoed across the empty land. She cried until her throat was raw, until her eyes burned, until there were no tears left. When she was empty, she sat among the ashes and tried to figure out what to do next. She couldn't go back to Portland. She'd rather die. But she couldn't stay here either. Too exposed, too close to town. Someone would find her, send her back to Marjorie or to another stranger who didn't want her. Clara's gaze drifted to the tree line, to the forest that bordered the farm's eastern edge. Her father had taught her those woods. They'd hiked the trails countless times, him teaching her to read signs, to identify plants, to move quietly and observe carefully. "The forest will take care of you if you respect it," he'd told her once. "It provides everything you need if you know how to look." Clara stood, shouldering her small backpack. She took one last look at the ruins, said a silent goodbye to the ghosts that lingered there, and walked into the forest. She didn't look back. The first week was the hardest. Clara knew wilderness survival in theory. Her father had taught her well, but practice was different. She found water easily enough, following the creek upstream until she located a spring she and her father had visited before. She knew which berries were safe, which plants could be eaten, which should be avoided, but knowing and doing were different things. The first time she tried to build a fire with friction, her hands blistered before she gave up and spent a cold night huddled beneath a fallen log. The first shelter she attempted collapsed in a mild rain, leaving her soaked and shivering. Slowly, painfully, Clara learned. She improved her fire-starting technique. She built better shelters using pine boughs and deadfall. She found a small cave, barely more than an overhang really, that provided genuine protection from the elements. Food was harder. Berries and edible plants weren't enough to sustain her. Clara needed protein, but hunting was beyond her capability. She tried making simple traps using techniques her father had shown her, but caught nothing. She was slowly starving when the wolf appeared. Clara had seen wolves before, always at a distance. Her father had pointed them out during hikes, teaching her to respect them but not fear them unnecessarily. Wolves don't hunt humans, he'd explained. They're curious, intelligent, and they avoid us unless threatened or desperate. The wolf that appeared at her cave entrance one evening seemed neither threatened nor desperate, just curious. It was large, with gray fur and amber eyes that studied Clara with unsettling intelligence. Clara froze, her heart hammering. The wolf was perhaps 10 feet away, close enough that she could see the scars on its muzzle, the way its ear twitched at small sounds, close enough to kill her easily if it chose. But it didn't move, just watched. "Hi," Clara whispered, her voice rusty from disuse. "I'm Clara." The wolf's ear twitched at the sound of her voice. Then it did something unexpected. It lowered its front half in what looked distinctly like a playbow, the way domestic dogs invited games. Clara blinked, uncertain. Was this wolf playing? It stayed in that position for a moment, then straightened and trotted away, disappearing into the trees. Clara sat frozen, trying to process what had just happened. The wolf returned at dawn, carrying something in its jaws. It dropped the object near Clara's cave entrance, then retreated a few paces to watch. A rabbit, dead, still warm, freshly killed. Clara stared at the offering, then at the wolf. "Is this for me?" The wolf sat, tongue lolling, looking distinctly pleased with itself. Carefully, Clara approached the rabbit. The wolf didn't move, didn't growl, just watched as she picked up the gift. When she looked back at the wolf, she felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. The wolf's tail wagged once, then it stood and trotted away again. From that day forward, the wolf returned regularly. Sometimes it brought food, rabbits, squirrels, once even a portion of a deer carcass that Clara couldn't have hunted herself. Other times, it simply sat near her cave, a silent guardian watching over the lost girl. Clara named him Shadow for the way he appeared and disappeared like a ghost. She began talking to him, her voice growing stronger as she narrated her days, shared her fears, spoke her grief aloud to ears that didn't judge or demand she move on. "I miss them so much," she told Shadow one evening as they sat watching the sunset. "My dad would know what to do. He always knew what to do, and Mama would make it hurt less somehow. And Jamie," her voice broke. "Jamie was only 6. He should have had his whole life ahead of him." Shadow moved closer, resting his large head on Clara's lap. The gesture was so dog-like, so gentle that Clara burst into tears, burying her face in his fur while he sat patiently, lending comfort in the only way he could. As weeks became months, Clara's life fell into rhythm. She followed Shadow sometimes, learning from watching him hunt, observing how he moved through the forest with silent grace. She learned to read the weather with increasing accuracy, to find food even in lean times, to keep warm as summer faded into autumn. Other wolves began appearing. Shadow's pack, Clara realized. They kept their distance, but seemed to accept her presence, this strange human cub that Shadow had adopted. Clara learned their hierarchy through observation, identifying the alpha pair, the subordinate adults, the yearling juveniles. She was living with wolves, and somehow, impossibly, it was working. But as autumn deepened toward winter, Clara faced a new challenge. Her summer clothes were wearing through, her shoes falling apart. The light jacket she'd brought was insufficient for mountain winter. She needed warmer clothing, better shelter, more food stored for the lean months ahead. Clara made careful trips to the edge of the forest, close enough to see the farms and houses of Cedar Ridge's outskirts, but staying hidden. She watched people, feeling like an alien observing another species. They seemed so consumed with trivial concerns. Clara overheard arguments about television shows, complaints about slow internet, discussions of weekend plans. Didn't they understand how precious life was? How quickly it could be stolen? During one of these observation trips, Clara spotted a clothesline behind a house. A heavy jacket hung beside work pants and thick socks. She waited until nightfall, then crept close and stole the items, her heart pounding with guilt and necessity. The jacket fit reasonably well, the pants she had to tie with cord, but the socks were perfect. Clara whispered an apology to whoever she'd stolen from and retreated back into the forest. As winter closed in, Clara improved her shelter, reinforcing the cave entrance with pine boughs and rocks, creating a proper windbreak. She stored nuts and dried berries, preserved meat when Shadow brought larger kills. She even managed to salvage a metal pot from an old campsite, allowing her to boil water and cook more effectively. The first major snowstorm of winter arrived in late November. Clara huddled in her cave, wrapped in the stolen jacket and every piece of clothing she owned, as wind howled outside and snow fell thick and fast. Shadow appeared during the storm, somehow sensing she needed company. He squeezed into the cave entrance and settled beside her, his body warmth helping ward off the dangerous cold. "Good boy," Clara murmured, pressing close to his furry side. "You're a good friend, Shadow." The wolf huffed softly as if acknowledging the praise. They weathered the storm together, Clara drifting in and out of sleep while Shadow kept watch. When the snow finally stopped 2 days later, nearly 3 feet had accumulated. The world outside was transformed into white silence, beautiful and deadly. Clara knew she wouldn't survive many storms like that without better preparation. The cave was adequate, but not ideal. She needed more insulation, more food reserves, a better way to maintain fire through long winter nights. That's when she remembered the old hunting cabin. Her father had shown it to her during a hike 2 years ago, an abandoned structure deep in the forest, probably 40 years old, used by hunters until the land became part of a conservation area and hunting was banned. The cabin had been weathered, but structurally sound when they'd found it. If it still stood, it could be her salvation. Finding it again took 3 days of searching through snow-covered forest. Clara recognized landmarks slowly: the distinctive lightning-struck pine, the boulder shaped like a bear, the stream crossing where her father had helped her balance on stones. Finally, she found it. The cabin looked worse than she remembered, but the roof was intact, the walls solid. The door hung crooked on rusty hinges, but it still functioned. Inside was a single room, perhaps 12 feet square. A broken chair lay in one corner. An old wood stove stood against the back wall, its pipe extending through the roof. The windows were grimy but unbroken. Clara's heart soared. This was perfect. This could work. She spent the next week making the cabin habitable. She cleared debris, swept out years of dust and animal droppings, stuffed gaps in the walls with moss and mud. The stove still functioned. Clara tested it carefully, relieved when smoke drew up the pipe rather than filling the room. Shadow helped in his own way, bringing food more frequently, as he seemed to understand Clara was establishing a permanent den. Once, 3 other wolves appeared at the cabin clearing, inspecting Clara's new home with curious sniffs before apparently approving and leaving. By December, Clara had transformed the cabin into genuine shelter. She'd salvaged materials from the forest, old tarps from abandoned campsites, forgotten camping gear, even a sleeping bag someone had left behind. These treasures, combined with her growing skills, created a space that was actually warm and dry. For the first time since the fire, Clara had something approximating a home. Winter deepened. Snow piled against the cabin walls. Clara developed routines, checking her trap line each morning, maintaining the fire, melting snow for water, preparing food. Shadow visited daily, sometimes staying for hours, sometimes just checking in before heading back to his pack. Clara celebrated her 9th birthday alone in the cabin, marking the day with a special meal of roasted rabbit and the last of some wild onions she'd found. She sang happy birthday to herself in a scratchy voice, then cried for an hour, remembering the elaborate celebrations her mother used to plan, the wooden toys her father would carve, the way Jamie would get frosting on his nose. But the tears didn't consume her like they once had. Grief was still there, a constant companion, but it had transformed from an acute agony to a chronic ache, painful but bearable. "I'm surviving," Clara told Shadow that evening. "Dad taught me well. I'm actually surviving out here." The wolf licked her face, his usual response to her sad voice. As winter eased toward spring, Clara faced a new concern. She'd been alone in the forest for nearly a year, and while she'd managed admirably, she was still just 9 years old. Her clothes were patched and repatched, her boots held together with cord and hope. She needed supplies she couldn't make or find in the forest, which meant venturing closer to civilization. Clara began making careful expeditions to the outskirts of Cedar Ridge, always at night, always moving like the wolves had taught her, silent, alert, ready to flee at the first sign of human presence. She scavenged what she could: food from dumpsters behind restaurants, wasteful but useful, clothes from donation bins, occasionally tools or supplies left unattended. She felt guilty about the stealing, but survival trumped morality. Her father would understand, she thought, would want her to do whatever was necessary to stay alive. During one of these expeditions, Clara overheard something that froze her in her tracks. 2 women talking outside a grocery store, their voices carrying in the quiet night air. "Did you hear about the Mitchell girl, Clara?" Clara pressed herself against the building's shadow, heart hammering. "The one from the fire? What about her? She ran away from her relatives in Portland. This was months ago. They've been looking for her, but nothing. The police think she's dead. Probably ran away and got lost or hurt. Tragic, after everything else that happened to that poor family. Maybe it's for the best. What kind of life would she have had, orphaned like that? At least she's not suffering anymore." The women moved away, their conversation shifting to other topics. Clara remained frozen, processing what she'd heard. They thought she was dead, had given up looking for her, which meant what? That she was free? That she could stay in the forest without fear of being dragged back to Marjorie's apartment? Or did it mean she'd become completely untethered, a ghost child with no place in the human world? Clara wasn't sure how she felt about that. Part of her was relieved. No more hiding, no more fear of discovery. But another part, a small frightened part she tried to ignore, whispered that she was losing herself out here, that the longer she stayed wild, the harder it would be to ever return to civilization, if she even wanted to return. That night, back in her cabin with Shadow curled by the wood stove, Clara made a decision. She would stay. The forest had accepted her, provided for her, become her home in ways Marjorie's apartment never could. Here, she was Clara Mitchell, survivor, student of her father's teachings, friend to wolves. In the city, she'd been just another foster kid, another tragic statistic, another burden for people who didn't want her. "I'm staying," she told Shadow. "This is where I belong now." The wolf's amber eyes reflected firelight as he regarded her with what Clara chose to interpret as approval. Spring arrived with explosive growth, the forest transforming from winter's starkness to vibrant green abundance. Clara worked her small garden. She'd cleared a patch near the cabin and planted seeds salvaged from various sources. Her father had taught her basic gardening, and though her plot was primitive, some vegetables took root. The wolf pack had accepted her fully by now. Clara understood their complex social structure, recognized individual wolves by sight and personality. She'd named them all. There was Shadow, of course, but also Scar, the alpha female with a distinctive facial mark, Runner, a lean male who seemed to cover incredible distances, and others. Sometimes Clara ran with them, her endurance built up over months of forest living, allowing her to keep pace for short distances. She couldn't match their speed or stamina, but the wolves adjusted their pace for her, including her in ways that suggested genuine acceptance rather than mere tolerance. On a warm June evening, Shadow led Clara to a hidden den site. Inside, protected and warm, 4 wolf pups tumbled over each other in play. Scar, their mother, watched from the entrance as Shadow invited Clara closer. The pups were perhaps 6 weeks old, still awkward and fluffy. They showed no fear of Clara, approaching with curiosity to sniff and nibble her fingers with needle-sharp puppy teeth. Clara laughed, actually laughed for the first time since the fire. The sound startled her, rusty and unfamiliar, but genuine. The pups were so ridiculously cute, their antics so entertaining, that joy bubbled up despite her grief. Shadow watched her with what Clara could only describe as satisfaction, as if he'd engineered this moment specifically to heal some broken part of her. Maybe he had. As the pups grew, Clara became a regular presence at the den. She brought food when she could, helped watch the pups while the adults hunted, became something like an aunt or older sister to the young wolves. They taught her things too, how to play without reservation, how to live in the present moment, how to find joy in simple things like chasing butterflies or wrestling over sticks. Clara's 9th summer was strangely happy. Yes, she missed her family with an ache that never fully faded. Yes, nights were sometimes dark with memories of fire and loss. But during the days, running through sun-dappled forest with wolves at her side, Clara found something precious, the ability to laugh again, to enjoy the present despite the painful past. She was changing, she knew. Her body was lean and strong from constant activity. Her senses had sharpened. She could hear a deer moving through underbrush from 100 yards away, could identify birds by call alone, could read weather in the feel of the wind. Her hair had grown long and wild, bleached by sun and tangled with pine needles she didn't bother removing. She was becoming something between worlds, not quite human, not quite wolf, but something new, something that belonged to the forest itself. The encounter came in late August, as summer began its slow transition toward autumn. Clara was checking her trapline near the stream when she heard voices, human voices, the first she'd heard in months. She froze, instinct telling her to hide, but curiosity won out. Moving with the silence Shadow had taught her, Clara crept closer. 2 hikers, a man and woman in their 20s, stood by the stream examining a map. "We're definitely lost," the woman was saying. "That trail marker was wrong, or we missed a turn somewhere." "Cell service is non-existent out here," the man replied, checking his phone. "We should follow this stream. Streams lead downhill, which should eventually take us toward civilization." Clara watched from behind a tree, fascinated by these strangers. They looked so clean, so obviously from the outside world. Their bright hiking clothes, their technical gear, their worried faces as they consulted their GPS device. All of it spoke of a world Clara had nearly forgotten existed. Part of her wanted to reveal herself, to help them find their way. But another part, the part that had been living wild for over a year, resisted. If she showed herself, they'd ask questions. They might recognize her from missing person reports. They'd try to take her back to that other world, to Marjorie, or people like her. So Clara remained hidden, watching as the hikers followed the stream downstream, arguing about whether to set up camp or keep hiking until dark. Eventually, they moved out of sight, their voices fading. Clara stood from her hiding place, feeling strangely shaken. The encounter had reminded her forcefully that she existed in a liminal space, neither fully wild nor truly civilized, capable of moving between worlds but belonging to neither. When she returned to her cabin, Shadow was waiting. He sensed her distress immediately, pressing against her legs in comfort. "I saw people," Clara told him. "Hikers. Lost. I could have helped them, but I hid instead. What does that make me?" Shadow had no answer, just continued his steady, grounding presence. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the hikers, about the world beyond the forest, about the life she'd left behind. Was she doing the right thing, staying out here, or was she running from something that needed to be faced? Her father's voice echoed in memory. Sometimes the bravest thing is to stay and fight. Sometimes it's to know when to let go and find a different path. Clara realized she was on a different path now, one her father never could have imagined. But he'd given her the skills to walk it, had taught her to respect the forest and learn from it. "I think you'd understand," she whispered to the darkness. "I think you'd be proud I survived." As autumn arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and the first hints of winter's return, Clara made improvements to her cabin. She'd learned much from her first winter and applied those lessons now. Better insulation, more food storage, improved techniques for everything from fire making to water collection. The wolf pups, now half-grown juveniles, had become skilled hunters themselves. They still played with Clara sometimes, though their play had taken on more serious tones as they practiced skills they'd need for survival. Shadow was constant, visiting daily without fail. Clara had grown so attuned to him that she could interpret his moods, understand the subtle communications in his body language and vocalizations. They'd developed their own form of dialogue, transcending the need for words. In late September, Shadow brought Clara a gift unlike any he'd given before. Not food, but an item clearly scavenged from human civilization. A pocket knife, the kind her father used to carry. It was worn but functional, still sharp enough to be useful. Clara accepted it with tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Shadow. This is perfect." The wolf seemed pleased with her reaction. Clara wondered where he'd found it, whether he'd somehow understood she needed tools beyond what nature provided. The intelligence in his amber eyes suggested understanding far beyond what science attributed to wolves. As her second winter in the forest approached, Clara felt more prepared than she'd been as a newly orphaned 8-year-old fleeing civilization. She'd proven she could survive the hardest season. Now she'd prove she could thrive through it. But the forest had one more lesson to teach her before winter's full arrival. It came in the form of a wounded hiker, a young man who'd apparently fallen and broken his ankle somewhere in the back country. Clara found him while checking her trapline, heard his weak calls for help from a ravine where he'd tumbled. Every instinct told her to leave, to avoid entanglement with the human world. But her father's voice was stronger. "We help people who need help. That's what makes us human, Clara. Compassion, kindness, those don't go away just because life gets hard." Clara approached the ravine's edge, looking down at the injured man. He was perhaps 20, his face twisted with pain, his ankle bent at an unnatural angle. When he saw her, his expression shifted from hope to confusion. "Hello," he called weakly. "Can you help me? Wait, are you a kid?" Clara hesitated, then made her decision. She couldn't speak to him. Her voice was too rusty, her words too forgotten, but she could help. Moving with practiced efficiency, Clara descended the ravine, collected sturdy branches, and fashioned a makeshift splint using techniques her father had taught her. The young man watched in amazement as this wild-looking child with tangled hair and strange animal-like grace cared for his injury with unexpected skill. "Who are you?" he whispered as Clara worked. "Where did you come from?" Clara didn't answer. When the splint was secure, she gestured for him to follow her, then began leading him through the forest toward the nearest trail that would eventually reach civilization. It took hours, the young man hobbling slowly, leaning on a walking stick Clara had found for him. Shadow appeared once, watching from a distance, and the man gasped. "Is that a wolf? Are you traveling with a wolf?" Clara ignored the question, focused on getting him to safety. As dusk fell, they finally reached a maintained trail near a parking area. Clara could see the man's car in the distance. "Thank you," the man said earnestly. "You saved my life. What's your name? Can I do anything for you?" Clara shook her head, already backing away toward the tree line. The man reached into his car and retrieved a thick winter coat, holding it out to her. "At least take this. It's going to be cold soon. Please." For a moment, Clara hesitated. Then she darted forward, snatched the coat, and disappeared into the trees before he could say another word. Behind her, she heard him calling, Thank you. Whoever you are, thank you. Clara ran deep into the forest before stopping to examine her prize. The coat was expensive, well-made, lined with real down. It would keep her warm through the hardest winter storms. That night, wrapped in her new coat with Shadow curled beside her, Clara felt something shift in her chest. She'd helped someone, had interacted with the human world without being pulled back into it, had proven she could be both Wild Thing and compassionate person. Maybe she wasn't losing her humanity out here. Maybe she was just discovering a different way to be human. Winter's second year was easier than the first. Clara's cabin was well prepared, her skills honed, her confidence in her ability to survive no longer in question. Shadow and his pack hunted nearby, sharing kills in lean times. The juvenile wolves from spring were now adults, and Scar had a new litter of pups den nearby. Clara celebrated her 10th birthday by carving a mark into the cabin wall, 2 straight lines representing 2 years survived. Then she allowed herself to imagine a future where those lines continued, where she grew up wild and free, never returning to the world that had failed to want her. But the forest, it seemed, had other plans. The ranger appeared in early spring, following reports from the injured hiker about a feral child living in the backcountry. Rangers had been searching all winter, and one persistent woman named Maria Santos had finally tracked Clara to her general area. Clara saw her coming from half a mile away. Santos moved through the forest with the competence of someone truly at home in wilderness, not like the bumbling hikers Clara occasionally encountered. There would be no hiding from this woman. Clara considered running, disappearing deeper into the forest where no searcher could follow, but something stopped her. Curiosity maybe, or perhaps loneliness she'd been denying, or simply the understanding that she couldn't hide forever. When Santos reached the cabin, Clara was sitting outside, Shadow at her side. The ranger stopped, taking in the scene. The half-wild child, the wolf sitting calmly beside her, the cabin that was clearly inhabited and maintained. "Hello," Santos said carefully, making no sudden moves. "My name is Maria. I'm a forest ranger. I've been looking for you for a while now." Clara said nothing, just watched. Santos seemed unsurprised by her silence. "There's a girl named Clara Mitchell who went missing 2 years ago," Santos continued, her voice gentle. "She'd be about 10 now. She survived a terrible fire that killed her family. Everyone thought she was dead. But I don't think you're dead, Clara. I think you've been surviving out here, doing an extraordinary job of it." Clara's eyes widened slightly at hearing her name. Shadow growled low, sensing her tension, but Clara placed a calming hand on his head. Santos slowly sat down on a fallen log about 15 feet away, making herself less threatening. "I'm not here to drag you back to anywhere you don't want to go. I just want to make sure you're safe, that you're okay. Can you at least nod if you understand me?" After a long moment, Clara nodded. "Thank you." Santos smiled. "You've been living here, in this cabin?" Another nod. "And the wolf, is he friendly? He won't attack me?" Clara's voice, rusty and unfamiliar, finally emerged. "Shadow won't hurt you unless you hurt me." Santos's eyes widened. "So you can speak. That's good. I wasn't sure." She gestured to the cabin. "May I look around? I promise I won't touch anything without asking." Clara hesitated, then stood and led Santos on a tour of her home. The ranger examined everything with professional interest and growing respect. The well-maintained wood stove, the stored food supplies, the tools and salvaged items Clara had collected, the marks on the wall tracking seasons and years. "This is impressive, Clara," Santos said honestly. "You've built yourself a real home here. Your father taught you well." At the mention of her father, Clara's eyes filled with tears. "He taught me everything. Before the fire took him." "I'm so sorry about your family," Santos said softly. "No child should have to survive what you've survived." They sat together outside the cabin, Santos careful not to crowd Clara's space. Shadow remained alert but not aggressive, clearly protective of his human. "The injured hiker you helped," Santos said. "He told authorities about you," said a child with incredible wilderness skills, "saved his life. That started the search again." "I didn't want to be found," Clara whispered. "I understand. But Clara, you're 10 years old. Living alone in the wilderness, no matter how capable you are, is dangerous. What happens if you get sick? If you're injured like that hiker, you could die out here with no one to help." "Shadow helps me." Santos glanced at the wolf. "He's remarkable. I've never seen a wolf bond with a human like this. But he can't set broken bones or treat infections. You need human support too." "They'll send me back to Marjorie," Clara said, her voice breaking. "Or to someone else who doesn't want me. The city was like a prison. I couldn't breathe there. What if there was another option?" Santos asked carefully. "What if you could stay close to the forest, close to Shadow, but also have proper shelter, education, medical care?" Clara looked up, suspicious but hopeful. "What do you mean?" I live in a ranger station about 8 miles from here. It's remote, no neighbors, surrounded by forest. I've been alone there for 3 years since my husband died. The place is too big for one person." Santos met Clara's eyes. "I could use a helper, someone who knows the forest like you do. And you could use an adult who actually cares whether you survive. You'd let me stay, near the forest. I'd let you have a real home, Clara, with walls that don't leak, and a kitchen with a stove that works properly, and books and warmth. You could still spend time in the forest. I'd never stop you. But you'd also have safety, education, someone looking out for you." Clara's mind raced. This wasn't like Marjorie's apartment. Santos understood wilderness, respected it, and 8 miles wasn't far. She could visit her cabin, could still see Shadow. What about Shadow and his pack? Wolves have territories that span dozens of miles. As long as you're within their range, they'll be able to find you. Though I'll admit, having a wolf pack comfortable near my station will be a new experience. Over the following weeks, a careful transition began. Santos didn't force Clara to leave immediately. Instead, she visited regularly, bringing supplies, medical supplies to treat the various small injuries Clara had been ignoring, books for Clara to read. "Your reading skills are good," Santos noted, watching Clara work through a novel. "Your father taught you well." "Mama taught me to read," Clara corrected. "She was a teacher before she married Dad." Slowly, Clara began visiting Santos's ranger station. It was everything promised. A sturdy log building with a wood stove and modern amenities, but surrounded by pristine forest. Solar panels provided electricity, a well-supplied water. The nearest town was 30 miles away. "You'd have your own room," Santos showed Clara, "and we'd set up a study area for homeschooling. I have a teaching certificate. I can provide proper education, but you'd also teach me. I've been a ranger for 20 years, but you know things about this forest that I never learned in school." The arrangement took months to formalize. Santos had to navigate legal complexities, becoming Clara's official guardian, dealing with questions about why the child had survived alone so long, handling Marjorie's hurt feelings when she learned Clara was alive but refused to return to Portland. "She doesn't want me anyway," Clara told Santos bluntly. "I was just an obligation." "Maybe so, but now you're my daughter if you'll have me." Clara looked up, eyes wide. "Daughter? I'm not trying to replace your mother," Santos said quickly. "No one could. But I'd like to be your family, Clara, if you'll let me." Clara thought about it, about what family meant. Blood, shared history, or perhaps something deeper. Perhaps family was whoever showed up when you needed them, whoever saw your worth when others saw burden. "Okay," Clara whispered. Clara struggled with sleeping indoors every night, with regular mealtimes and structured learning. She'd grown feral in ways that couldn't be instantly domesticated. Some nights she slipped out to sleep in the forest, and Santos learned not to panic, trusting Clara to return by morning. Shadow visited the ranger station regularly, much to Santos's initial alarm, but the wolf never threatened, just checked on Clara before returning to his pack. Other wolves appeared occasionally, and Santos learned to coexist with them, understanding they were part of Clara's chosen family. Clara began learning things she'd missed, formal mathematics beyond basic counting, history, science, geography, but she also taught Santos, showed her animal tracking techniques, plant identification skills, weather prediction methods her father had taught her. "You're a gifted student," Santos told her one evening, "and an even better teacher." Slowly, Clara started to heal. Not completely. The scars from losing her family would never fully fade, but the acute grief transformed into something she could carry without being crushed by it. On the second anniversary of the fire, Santos and Clara hiked to the old Mitchell farm together. The ruins were still there, slowly being reclaimed by nature. Clara placed wildflowers she'd picked on each spot where her family had died. "I'm okay now," she told the ghosts. "I survived. Dad, you taught me well. Mama, Jamie, I'll never forget you. But I have to keep living. I have to keep growing." Shadow appeared from the trees, as if he'd been waiting for this moment. He sat beside Clara, lending his presence to her grief. "You really think they can hear you?" Santos asked gently. "Maybe not, but it helps to say it anyway." Clara looked at the ranger who'd become her guardian, her teacher, her friend. "Thank you for finding me, for giving me a choice instead of just dragging me away." "Thank you for letting me in," Santos replied. "You've made my house feel like a home again." Years passed. Clara grew from a wild 10-year-old into a thoughtful teenager who moved between worlds with unique ease. She excelled in her studies, particularly in biology and ecology. She became Santos's unofficial assistant, helping with ranger duties, tracking wildlife, leading occasional tours for researchers studying the wolf pack that had adopted a human child. Shadow grew old, his muzzle graying, his movements slowing. When he finally passed, peacefully, in his sleep at the age of 14, Clara held a ceremony in the forest, thanking him for saving her life in every way that mattered. "You were my family when I had none," she told his body before the pack took him deep into the forest for their own farewell. You taught me I could survive, that I was worth saving. New wolves joined the pack. Shadow's descendants carried something of his unusual temperament, his comfort with humans, or at least with Clara. She watched them from a distance now, no longer running with them as she once had, but still connected in ways that transcended species. At 16, Clara faced another choice. Santos had connections at the state university, could help Clara get admitted to study wildlife biology, but that meant leaving the mountains, spending most of the year in the city. I don't know if I can do it, Clara confessed. Cities still feel like prisons. You're not the same frightened 8-year-old anymore, Santos reminded her. You're strong, capable, brilliant, and it's not forever. Summer breaks, winter holidays, you'd come home. This is always your home. Clara thought about her parents, about the education they'd valued, the future they'd wanted for her, about her father teaching her the forest because he believed knowledge was treasure, about her mother reading to her every night because stories opened worlds. They'd want me to go, Clara said finally, to learn, to grow, even if it's hard. So Clara went to university, studying ecology and animal behavior. She struggled with crowds and concrete, with the noise and chaos of urban life. But she also discovered she had unique perspectives to offer, insights from years of living as part of the wilderness, rather than just observing it from outside. She became known among her professors as the student who understood animals not as subjects to study, but as neighbors, as family, as complex individuals with their own intelligence and dignity. Her senior thesis on human-wolf interaction, drawing from her own experiences, won awards and sparked new research directions. Clara returned to the mountains each summer, hiking out to her old cabin, which still stood weathered but sturdy. She'd sit there with Santos, now in her 50s but still vital and strong, talking about her studies, her future, her dreams. I want to come back, Clara said during one of these visits. After graduation, work as a ranger like you, help protect this place and the wolves who saved me. I was hoping you'd say that, Santos smiled. There's a junior ranger position opening up. It's yours if you want it. Clara graduated with honors at 21. She returned to the mountains immediately, taking the ranger position and moving into a small cabin Santos helped her build near the station. It was close to her old survival cabin, close enough that wolves still visited. She dedicated her career to wildlife management, particularly wolf conservation. Drawing from her unique experiences, Clara became an advocate for coexistence between humans and predators, lecturing at schools and conferences about how her life had been saved by the very animals most people feared. On the 10th anniversary of the fire, Clara hiked to the Mitchell farm ruins one final time. The forest had almost completely reclaimed the site now. Only the stone chimney remained visible, a marker of lives lived and lost. I did it, Clara told her family's ghosts. I survived. I grew up. I made something good from all the pain. She placed flowers on the ground. I hope you're proud. I hope wherever you are, you know I'm okay, that I'm happy. A wolf howl echoed from the ridge, not Shadow, who was gone, but one of his descendants, carrying on the tradition of watching over the human who belonged to the pack. Clara howled back, her voice clear and strong, bridging the gap between species, between past and present, between the frightened child she'd been and the confident woman she'd become. 20 years after the fire, Clara stood before a group of at-risk youth, kids who'd experienced trauma, loss, who felt broken beyond repair. She told them her story, the fire, the loss, the choice to survive, the wolves who became family, the ranger who offered a different kind of home. I'm not saying your path will look like mine, she said, but I am saying that trauma doesn't have to define you, that survival is possible, that family comes in unexpected forms, that you're stronger than you know. A young girl in the front row raised her hand. Were you scared? Living alone in the forest? Terrified, Clara admitted. Every single day at first. But I learned something important. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to keep going despite it. What happened to the wolf? Another child asked. Shadow? Clara smiled, though her eyes carried old sadness. He lived a long, good life for a wolf. He died old and peaceful, surrounded by his pack. But his descendants still live in these mountains. Sometimes, when I'm hiking, they'll follow me for a while, keeping watch, reminding me where I came from. After the presentation, several children approached with questions, with their own stories of loss and fear. Clara listened to each one, offered what comfort and wisdom she could, and watched as hope kindled in eyes that had been dark with despair. That evening, she hiked to her old survival cabin, now a historical site, preserved as part of an educational program about wilderness survival and human resilience. She sat outside as the sun set, watching the forest she'd learned to call home. Santos joined her, moving slower now in her late 60s, but still vibrant. Good talk today. I think so. Those kids needed to hear that survival is possible, that they're not broken beyond repair, like someone once needed to hear the same thing, Santos observed. You've come a long way, Clara.
From that silent, terrified child to this, a woman who saves others by sharing her story. Clara leaned against her adopted mother's shoulder. I had good teachers, a father who prepared me for survival, wolves who showed me family takes many forms, and a ranger who gave me the space to heal at my own pace. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and stars emerged. Somewhere in the forest, a wolf howled, answered by others, the pack communicating across miles of wilderness. Clara smiled, recognizing the voices. Shadow's great-great-grandchildren, still watching, still protecting, still honoring the bond that had formed 2 decades ago between a grieving child and a compassionate wolf. Thank you, Clara whispered to the forest, to the wolves, to the family she'd lost, and the family she'd found. Thank you for teaching me that home isn't a place. It's wherever love exists, in whatever form it takes. The forest whispered back in the language of wind through pines, in the chorus of night insects, in the distant wolf song that carried across mountains older than human memory. Clara had come home, not to the farmhouse of her childhood, now ash and memory, but to something deeper, a home built from survival and courage, from compassion and wildness, from the understanding that family means whoever stays when the world catches fire. And in this home, finally, Clara Mitchell was complete.